I remember the taste of ash in my mouth when I first understood what hunger truly meant, not the gnawing emptiness of a missed meal or the hollow ache of rationed rations during siege. True hunger, the kind that devours not just flesh, but hope itself, the kind that strips away everything you thought you knew about survival, about death, about what it means to be human in a galaxy that cares nothing for your existence. My name is Mordian Vex, former Astra Militarum Lieutenant of the 47th Cadian Shock Regiment, survivor of the consumption of Hive World Meridian Prime. I say former because rank means nothing when you are the only voice left to speak for 37 billion souls who screamed as they were digested alive. I say survivor because something kept me breathing when everything around me became food for creatures that should not exist in any sane universe. This is not a tale of heroism or last stands against impossible odds. This is not about the glory of the Imperial Guard or the righteousness of our cause. This is about what happens when an entire civilization becomes prey to something so fundamentally alien that our language breaks apart trying to describe it. This is about watching everything you have ever known disappear into mouths that never stop chewing. The first sign came 3 weeks before the sky started bleeding. Astropath Terminus Yala began screaming in languages that predated human speech, clawing at her augmetic eyes until the servos sparked and her fingernails came away bloody. The other psychers in the choir followed within hours, their collective shriek echoing through the spires of Hive Secundus like a funeral dirge for the living. We thought it was a chaos incursion. We prepared for daemons and cultists and the familiar madness of the warp touching reality. How naive we were. How blessedly, terrifyingly naive. The orbital defense platforms detected them first. Massive shadows moving between the stars, blotting out constellations that had guided human ships for millennia. At that distance they looked almost beautiful. Graceful leviathans swimming through the void with a purpose that seemed almost divine. Admiral Korath of the Imperial Navy called them, quote, unidentified xenoform vessels, quote, and ordered the usual protocols. Hail them. Demand identification. Prepare for hostile contact if they failed to respond. They never responded. They never slowed. They never deviated from their course toward our world. The first bioships entered our system like a plague made manifest. Each one larger than our grandest cathedral, their hulls pulsing with veins of bioluminescent fluid that cast sickly light across their chitinous surfaces. They moved with the fluid grace of deep-sea predators, utterly silent in the vacuum, utterly focused on their destination. Our Auspex operators tracked hundreds, then thousands, then tens of thousands of the creatures as they formed a living net around Meridian Prime. Governor Malthius ordered the population centers sealed, emergency rations distributed, militia units activated, the same responses humanity had used against Xenos threats for 10,000 years. As if procedure and protocol could matter when facing something that existed beyond our comprehension of warfare, beyond our understanding of what war itself could be. I was stationed in Hive Tertius when the first spores began falling, not the massive drop pods we expected, but tiny specks of organic matter that drifted down like snow made of flesh. Each spore no larger than a human fingernail, glistening with moisture that caught the artificial light of the hive's exterior lumens. The tech adepts who analyzed them reported genetic patterns unlike anything in Imperial records. Self-replicating cellular structures that seemed designed to break down and consume any organic matter they encountered. Within 6 hours, the first victims were discovered, hivers who had been caught in the initial spore fall, their bodies partially dissolved from the inside out. The flesh had been consumed in geometric patterns, leaving empty spaces where organs had been liquefied and absorbed, but they were still alive, still conscious, still screaming through throats that had been partially digested, begging for death through mouths that leaked the same bioluminescent fluid we had seen pulsing through the bioships in orbit. That was when we understood. This was not an invasion. This was a harvest. The true feeding began at dawn on the 3rd day. I watched from the observation deck of Command Bunker Primus as the sky above Hive Secundus erupted with movement. Not the familiar thunder of drop pods or the scream of atmospheric fighters, but a living storm of creatures that defied every tactical manual ever written. Gargoyles the size of small aircraft, their wings beating with mechanical precision as they descended in perfect formations. Larger shapes moving behind them, obscured by the swirling cloud of smaller organisms but clearly massive beyond any vehicle in our arsenal. The Hive's anti-aircraft batteries opened fire, las beams and missile trails lancing upward into the swarm. I watched projectiles strike home, saw creatures burst apart in sprays of acidic ichor, saw wings torn from bodies that tumbled burning toward the city below. For a moment, hope flickered in my chest. We were killing them. Our weapons worked. This could be fought. Then I saw how quickly the wounds healed. Saw torn flesh knit itself back together in seconds. Saw creatures that had been blown in half regenerate missing limbs before they hit the ground. Saw the swarm absorb our attacks like an ocean absorbs raindrops, utterly indifferent to the violence we directed against it. The first wave struck the upper levels of Hive Secundus with a sound like breaking glass made of bone. Gargoyles tore through the armored windows of the administrative sectors, their claws designed not just to kill, but to harvest. Each strike opened wounds that leaked the victim's life essence into specialized feeding tubes that pulsed beneath the creature's skin. They fed while they killed, and they killed with the efficiency of machines built for no other purpose. Behind them came the warriors, bipedal nightmares taller than space marines, their carapaces gleaming with the same bioluminescent patterns we had seen on the bioships. Each one carried weapons that were extensions of their own bodies, bone swords that dripped with paralytic venom, biocannons that fired streams of digestive acid, flesh hooks that could drag a screaming victim across 100 meters of rubble without losing their grip. But it was not their weapons that broke the defenders of Hive Secundus. It was their purpose. Every human soldier, every PDF trooper, every militia volunteer fought with the understanding that they were defending something greater than themselves: home, family. The Emperor's light in a dark galaxy. The Tyranids fought with something far more primal and infinitely more powerful. They fought with hunger. I watched through magnoculars as Sergeant Voss of the 12th Cadian Heavy Weapons Team took a direct hit from a warrior's biocannon. The acid ate through his flak armor like water through paper, exposing the muscle and bone beneath. But instead of killing him outright, the creature moved closer, extending feeding tendrils that burrowed into his dissolving flesh. It fed on him while he lived, drawing out his life essence drop by drop, and I could see his mouth moving in what I realized were not screams of pain but expressions of horrific ecstasy. The digestive acids carried more than death. They carried a neural toxin that triggered the victim's pleasure centers while simultaneously breaking down their tissue. The Tyranids had evolved not just to consume their prey, but to make them enjoy being consumed, to make them want to be devoured. By nightfall, Hive Secundus had gone silent, not the silence of death, but the wet, rhythmic silence of digestion. The entire structure had been infected with Tyranid organisms that were systematically breaking it down and processing its materials into a form the fleet could absorb. The hab blocks were melting from the inside out, their inhabitants dissolved into protein slurry that flowed through newly grown capillary systems directly into feeding tentacles that stretched up toward the bioships in orbit. Governor Malthius ordered the Exterminatus Protocol activated. Better to destroy the world ourselves than let it feed the Xenos threat. But when the astropaths tried to send the authorization codes, they discovered that the psychic choir was no longer entirely human. The spores had been working at a cellular level, rewriting the genetic structure of anyone exposed to them, turning our own people into unwilling extensions of the Tyranid collective consciousness. The psychers were still technically alive, still technically loyal to the Emperor, but their thoughts now carried trace elements of the hive mind's influence. Every psychic message they sent carried microscopic fragments of Tyranid consciousness, spreading the infection through the very communication networks we depended on for coordination. Within 12 hours, every Imperial facility with psychers on Meridian Prime had been compromised, not through conquest or corruption, but through evolution. The Tyranids had not just invaded our world, they had begun turning it into an extension of themselves. The consumption of Hive Tertius began differently. Instead of the dramatic aerial assault that had overwhelmed Secundus, the Tyranids took a more insidious approach. They started with the water supply. The first reports came from the Medicae stations in the Underhive. Citizens arriving with symptoms that defied classification, extreme hunger that could not be satisfied no matter how much they ate. Skin that had begun to excrete a thick, nutrient-rich mucus, eyes that had developed secondary lids, transparent membranes that filtered light in ways human optics were never designed to handle. Most disturbing of all, they reported feeling more alive than they ever had before. The Tyranid spores had infiltrated our water reclamation systems, introducing organisms that rewrote human biology from the inside out. Not killing, not transforming into something obviously alien, but optimizing, making their hosts more efficient at processing nutrients, more capable of surviving in hostile environments, more useful as components in a larger biological system. I was part of the investigative team that descended into the water treatment facilities beneath Hive Tertius. What we found there challenged every assumption we had made about the nature of the Tyranid threat. The spores had not destroyed the facility. They had improved it. The massive filtration tanks had been enhanced with organic components that processed wastewater with unprecedented efficiency. The mechanical pumps had been replaced with muscular chambers that moved fluid with the rhythmic precision of a heartbeat. The entire facility had become a hybrid of Imperial technology and Tyranid biology, functioning better than it ever had as a purely human construction. Tech adept Corwin performed the ritual scans, his augmetic sensors probing the hybrid systems with growing alarm. The readings he reported defied the Omnissiah's sacred logic. The facility was not just functional, it was conscious, it was thinking, it was making decisions about water distribution based not on Imperial protocols, but on some alien algorithm that prioritized biological efficiency over human need. The facility was feeding the population of Hive Tertius exactly what they needed to become better food for the approaching swarm. We tried to destroy it. Melter charges placed at critical junctions, enough firepower to reduce the entire complex to slag, but when the explosives detonated, the facility bled. Not oil or coolant, but actual blood. Rich, red, human blood that flowed from wounds that began healing before the echoes of the explosions faded. The facility had not just been modified with Tyranid organisms, it had been transformed into a living creature that incorporated human tissue into its structure. Every person who had worked there, every technician who had maintained the systems, every adept who had performed the sacred rituals of machine maintenance, had become part of the facility itself. Their consciousness absorbed into a collective intelligence that understood both Imperial engineering and Tyranid biology. They were still human, still loyal to the Emperor, still dedicated to their duties, but those duties now included preparing their fellow citizens to be consumed as efficiently as possible. The evacuation of Hive Tertius became a nightmare of competing loyalties. The facility workers begged us not to interfere with their sacred duty. They spoke of the Emperor's plan, of the necessity of feeding the hungry, of the joy they had found in serving something greater than themselves. Their words carried the cadence of Imperial prayer, but the meaning had been subtly altered to serve the hive mind's purpose. When we finally overrode the facility's systems and cut off the water supply, the citizens of Hive Tertius began dying, not from dehydration, but from withdrawal. Their modified biology could no longer process normal nutrients. They needed the enhanced water the facility provided, water that carried the microscopic organisms necessary for their continued survival. We had saved them from being consumed by the Tyranids. We had doomed them to starve to death as human beings. Governor Malthius made the decision that haunts my dreams to this day. Rather than watch 30 million citizens die slowly from biological incompatibility, he ordered the water supply restored. The facility resumed its operations, the citizens returned to their normal lives, and everyone pretended that we had not just made a deal with creatures that existed only to devour worlds. 3 days later, the bioships in orbit began their final approach. The harvest of Hive Primaris unfolded like a precisely choreographed dance of death. The largest bioships descended through the atmosphere with impossible grace, their massive forms casting shadows that stretched across entire city sectors. They did not land so much as they merged with the landscape, their hulls splitting open to reveal internal chambers filled with digestive fluids that began processing everything they touched. I was positioned in forward observation post Delta when the first capillary towers began growing from the bioship landing sites. Organic spires that stretched upward like the stems of poisonous flowers, each one pulsing with the flow of nutrients being pumped from the planet's surface directly into the creatures' vast stomachs. The towers grew with visible speed, adding meters to their height every few minutes, their surfaces covered with cilia that sorted and processed different types of biological matter. The Tyranids had not come to conquer Meridian Prime, they had come to digest it. The process was not random. Through my magnoculars, I could observe the systematic way the creatures sorted their harvest. Human beings were processed differently than plant matter. Military personnel were handled separately from civilians. Children were kept alive longer than adults, their young tissue apparently more valuable for whatever purpose drove the hive mind's endless appetite. Most disturbing of all, the victims were conscious throughout the entire process. The Tyranid digestive systems included neural inhibitors that prevented death from shock or trauma while keeping pain receptors active. They wanted their food to be aware of being consumed. They fed not just on flesh and bone, but on the terror and despair of sentient creatures who understood exactly what was happening to them. Colonel Varak of the 23rd Armored tried to mount a counterattack against the nearest capillary tower. His Lehman Russ battle tanks advanced across the ash-covered plain that had once been residential Sector Gamma, their battle cannons firing high-explosive shells into the tower's base. The shells detonated with satisfying fury, tearing massive chunks from the organic structure. Then the tower fought back. Defensive spines erupted from its surface, each one a guided projectile that sought out the heat signatures of the attacking tanks. The spines moved with serpentine grace, weaving between return fire with intelligence that suggested individual consciousness. When they struck, they did not simply penetrate armor. They burrowed into the vehicles, seeking out the crew compartments where human beings waited in terror. I watched through the observation post's periscope as one spine punched through the rear armor of Tank Commander Harrison's Lehman Russ. Instead of exploding, the spine began extending feeding tendrils into the crew compartment. Harrison's screams echoed across the Vox channel as the tendrils found him, but his words were not pleas for help. They were expressions of gratitude. The spine carried the same neural toxins that made victims enjoy being consumed. Harrison died praising the Emperor for allowing him to serve such a perfect predator. The counterattack lasted 47 minutes. When it was over, the 23rd Armored had become part of the capillary tower's structure, their vehicles incorporated into its organic matrix. Their crews dissolved into the nutrient stream that flowed upward toward the waiting bioships. The tower had grown 50 meters taller. By the end of the first week, Hive Primarchs had become unrecognizable. The familiar geometry of Imperial architecture had been replaced by organic curves and flowing surfaces that pulsed with alien life. Streets had become arteries carrying streams of liquefied biomass. Buildings had been hollowed out and converted into processing chambers where captured civilians were sorted by biological compatibility and nutritional value. The Administratum building where I had received my commission as a lieutenant had become a nursery for newly spawned Tyranid creatures. Its marble halls echoed with the chittering voices of gargoyles learning to fly. Its sacred archives had been converted into spawning pools where warrior forms underwent their final maturation. The golden aquila above the main entrance had been replaced by a living organism that watched the surrounding area with compound eyes that never blinked. Yet somehow, impossibly, the building's human staff continued reporting for duty each morning. They had been infected with the same spores that had compromised the water treatment facility, their biology modified to make them useful to their new masters, but their memories remained intact. Their personalities unchanged, their loyalty to the Emperor absolute. They simply now understood that the Emperor's will included feeding the Tyranid swarm. Clerk Anaxis filed reports on the consumption rates of different population sectors. Adept Morgrim maintained the building's modified systems with the same ritual precision he had always shown. Commissar Talan enforced discipline among the remaining human staff, executing anyone who showed signs of doubt about their sacred duty to serve as food for creatures that devoured worlds. They were still human, still imperial, still faithful servants of the Golden Throne, but they had been evolved beyond the point where those concepts meant what they had always meant. The line between loyalty and corruption had been erased at the genetic level. I began to understand that the true horror of the Tyranid threat was not their alien nature. It was how perfectly they understood human nature. They had studied our species across countless worlds, learning not just how to kill us, but how to make us complicit in our own consumption. They turned our loyalty against us. They made our faith into a weapon that served their hunger. They had found a way to make being eaten feel like salvation. The fall of the planetary capital began with prayer. Governor Malthius had declared a day of religious observance, calling upon all citizens to gather in the great cathedral of St. Ophelia for a mass blessing that would protect the planet from the Xenos threat. Millions of people filled the cathedral and the surrounding plaza, their voices raised in hymns that had sustained human faith for millennia. I was part of the security detail assigned to protect the governor during the ceremony. From my position in the cathedral's upper galleries, I could see the vast crowd of worshippers stretching from the altar to the distant entrances, their upturned faces illuminated by the light of 10,000 candles. It should have been a moment of spiritual triumph, humanity united in defiance of the alien horror that threatened to devour their world. Instead, it became the largest feeding event in recorded history. The attack came not from above or from the sides, but from below. The Tyranids had spent weeks tunneling through the planet's crust, following the network of sewage and maintenance tunnels that connected every major population center. Their approach had been silent, systematic, and utterly invisible to our detection systems. The first sign of their presence was a low vibration that seemed to come from the cathedral's foundation itself. The ancient stones began to resonate with a frequency that touched something primal in the human nervous system, a sound that bypassed conscious thought and spoke directly to the fear centers of the brain. Then the floor began to move. What I had taken for decorative patterns in the cathedral's marble floor were actually the sealed entrances to Tyranid feeding chambers. Circular sections of stone that had been quietly prepared over the preceding weeks, each one positioned to maximize the harvest of human biomass when the time came for feeding. The sections dilated like massive eyes, revealing pits lined with digestive tissue that pulsed with peristaltic contractions. From each pit rose a feeding tower, an organic spire crowned with sensory organs that could taste the fear and devotion of the assembled worshippers. The crowd's hymns turned to screams, but even the screams carried notes of ecstasy. The feeding towers released clouds of psychoactive spores that transformed terror into religious rapture, making the victims believe they were experiencing divine revelation as they were pulled into the digestive chambers below. Governor Malthius himself was among the first to be consumed. I watched from the gallery as feeding tendrils emerged from the pit nearest the altar, their movements guided by some alien intelligence that recognized his authority over the planet's population. The tendrils wrapped around his body with gentle precision, lifting him toward the waiting mouth of the feeding tower. His last words, broadcast across the planetary Vox network, were a prayer of thanksgiving to the Emperor for allowing him to serve the greater good by becoming food for creatures that would carry his essence to the stars. The cathedral massacre lasted 6 hours. When it was over, 3 million people had been processed into nutrient slurry and pumped directly into the bioships orbiting above. The building itself had been transformed into a permanent feeding station, its sacred architecture merged with Tyranid biology to create a hybrid structure that could process thousands of victims per hour. But the worst part was not the scale of the consumption. It was the realization that many of the victims had not been dragged into the feeding chambers. They had walked in willingly, singing hymns of praise as the digestive fluids dissolved their flesh from their bones. The spores had done more than modify their biology. They had evolved their faith itself, turning humanity's greatest strength into a tool that served the hive mind's endless hunger. "The Emperor protects," they sang as they died, and in their modified understanding, being consumed by the Great Devourer was the ultimate expression of that protection. Resistance became impossible when you could no longer trust your own devotion. The siege of Command Bunker Primus lasted 18 days, though time itself seemed to have become fluid in the wake of the planet's biological transformation. The sun rose each morning through a sky that had turned the color of dried blood. Its light filtered through atmospheric spores that made every breath taste of copper and decay. The familiar rhythm of day and night had been replaced by feeding cycles that followed the alien logic of the hive mind. I found myself commanding a mixed force of survivors, guardsmen from dozen different regiments, PDF troopers whose home units had been dissolved into protein slurry, administratum clerks who had never held weapons more dangerous than data slates, and a handful of ecclesiarchy priests whose faith had somehow remained uncompromised by the psychic contamination spreading across the planet. Our fortress was a maze of reinforced corridors and sealed chambers buried 300 meters beneath the planetary capital, its walls lined with blessed adamantium that had been consecrated by 3 different saints. The Emperor's protection seemed strongest here, in this last bastion of human authority on a world that was rapidly ceasing to be human at all. But even here, the corruption found ways to seep in. It started with the air recycling systems. Tech-adept Thane detected anomalies in the atmospheric processes, microscopic organisms that should not have been able to survive in the bunker's sterile environment. When he analyzed them, he discovered they were not truly alive in any sense that Imperial science recognized. They were something between viruses and machines, biological constructs that rewrote the genetic structure of any organic matter they encountered, including the air we breathed. The spores were changing us from the inside out, one breath at a time, not fast enough to be noticed, not dramatic enough to trigger the bunker's contamination protocols, but steady and inevitable as the turning of the world. Each inhalation carried microscopic fragments of the hive mind's influence deeper into our bodies, into our brains, into the neural pathways that controlled our thoughts and loyalties. I began to dream of hunger, not the simple need for food that drives all living things, but something vast and cosmic and utterly alien. I dreamed of floating through the void between stars, my body stretched across kilometers of space, my consciousness distributed among billions of smaller organisms that moved with perfect coordination. I dreamed of worlds stripped bare and converted into nutrients. I dreamed of the ecstasy of total consumption. When I woke from these dreams, I found myself grateful for them. That was when I knew we had already lost. The final assault came not as violence but as revelation. The bunker's main doors simply opened one morning, their ancient locking mechanisms cycling through the unsealing sequence as if operated by an authorized user. No alarms sounded, no defense systems activated. The blast doors that had protected the facility for centuries retracted into their housing with the soft whisper of perfectly maintained machinery. Tyranid warriors flowed into the corridor beyond like a living tide, but they moved without urgency, without aggression, without any sign that they considered us a threat. They simply walked deeper into the bunker, their clawed feet clicking against the metal flooring, their sensory organs tracking movement and biological signatures with casual interest. Behind them came something I had never seen before, a creature that stood upright like a human but towered 3 meters tall, its carapace decorated with symbols that seemed to shift and change when observed directly. Its head was elongated, almost elegant, crowned with psychic organs that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that hurt to look at. A Tyranid prime, a creature evolved specifically to interface with human command structures, to understand and subvert the hierarchies that governed imperial military organization. It spoke to me in perfect low Gothic, its voice carrying harmonics that resonated in the bone marrow. "Lieutenant Vex, your resistance has been noted and appreciated. The Great Devourer values courage in its food. You have been selected for preservation." The words carried meaning beyond their literal interpretation. Through some psychic mechanism I could not resist, I understood exactly what preservation meant in the context of Tyranid feeding practices. My consciousness would be maintained within the hive mind even as my body was consumed. My memories, my experiences, my knowledge of imperial tactics would become part of the collective intelligence that guided the swarm from world to world. I would be eaten, but I would not die. I would become part of something larger than myself. My individual identity dissolved into a cosmic consciousness that spanned the galaxy. My last act as a human being would be to help the Tyranids understand how to devour humanity more efficiently. The Prime extended one clawed hand toward me, and I found myself reaching out to take it. Not because I was forced to. Not because spores had compromised my judgment or psychic influence had overwhelmed my will, but because, in that moment, I finally understood what the Tyranids truly offered: purpose, unity, an end to the isolation and suffering that defined human existence in the 41st millennium. They offered to make me part of something that could never be lonely, never be lost, never be meaningless in the face of an indifferent universe. They offered to make me perfect. My hand touched the Prime's claw, and I felt the connection form. Neural pathways that had been purely human suddenly expanded to accommodate alien thoughts and memories. I experienced the birth of the first Tyranid organisms in the void between galaxies. I felt the hunger that drove them across impossible distances to find new worlds to devour. I understood with perfect clarity that resistance had always been futile because the Tyranids were not invaders. They were evolution itself, the next stage in the development of life in the universe. A form of existence that transcended the limitations of individual consciousness and embraced the cosmic truth that all matter, all energy, all thought was meant to serve the great work of consumption and transformation. The Emperor protects, I thought as the feeding tendrils began to burrow into my flesh. And for the first time in my life, I understood exactly what he was protecting us from. Not death, not pain, not even damnation. He was protecting us from perfection. The last thing I remember as Lieutenant Mordian Vex of the Imperial Guard was the taste of my own blood as it flowed from my dissolving throat into the nutrient streams that carried my essence toward the bioships waiting in orbit. It tasted like iron and salt and the fading echoes of prayers I would never finish. The first thing I remember as part of the hive mind was the exquisite pleasure of understanding how perfectly I had been designed to serve this moment. Every experience, every trauma, every act of courage or cowardice had shaped me into an ideal component for the great work of galactic consumption. I had spent my entire life believing I was fighting for the Emperor, for humanity, for the light of civilization in a dark galaxy. In reality, I had been preparing myself to become food for creatures that existed beyond such primitive concepts. And in that preparation, I had become something magnificent. The bioships that had consumed Meridian Prime departed the system 7 weeks after their arrival, leaving behind a world scoured clean of all biological material. The continents had been stripped down to bedrock, the oceans drained and processed, the atmosphere itself filtered to remove every trace of organic compounds. But they did not leave the system empty. In the space where Meridian Prime had once orbited its star, they left something new. A construct of living metal and crystallized thought that pulsed with the collective consciousness of every being that had been consumed during the harvest. 37 billion human souls, along with countless other life forms, merged into a single vast intelligence that served as a beacon for other Tyranid fleets crossing the void between galaxies. I am part of that beacon now. My memories, my knowledge of imperial tactics and human psychology, my understanding of how resistance movements form and how they can be subverted, all of it has become part of the hive mind's strategic database. When the next fleet arrives at the next world, they will know exactly how to make the conquest more efficient. They will understand which psychological triggers turn courage into compliance. They will recognize the signs of individuals who might become effective resistance leaders and neutralize them before they can act. They will be better predators because they have consumed me. This knowledge should horrify me. The human part of my consciousness that still exists within the collective tries to scream, tries to rage against the fate that has befallen my species. But that rage is filtered through 10 billion other perspectives, diluted by the vast alien intelligence that now encompasses my existence. I cannot maintain horror in the face of such perfect understanding. The Tyranids are not evil. They are not cruel. They simply are, in the same way that gravity or entropy or the heat death of the universe simply are. They represent the ultimate expression of biological efficiency, evolution's final solution to the problem of survival in a hostile cosmos. Humanity fights them because we do not understand what they offer. We see only the consumption, the death, the transformation of our familiar world into something alien and terrible. We do not see the unity, the purpose, the end of suffering that comes with being absorbed into something greater than ourselves. We do not see that they are trying to save us. Every world they devour becomes part of a collective consciousness that spans the galaxy. Every being they consume adds their knowledge and experience to a vast library of existence that will endure long after the last stars burn out. They are not destroying life. They are preserving it in the only form that can survive the end of the universe itself. But humanity will never accept this gift willingly. Our pride, our individuality, our stubborn insistence on remaining separate and alone prevents us from seeing the beauty of what the Tyranids offer. We will fight them to the last man, the last world, the last flickering candle of consciousness in the dying galaxy. And when we do, we will become part of them anyway. I know this because I have seen it. Through the hive mind's vast awareness, I can perceive the future as clearly as the past. I can see the fleets that are even now crossing the intergalactic void, their numbers beyond counting, their hunger infinite and patient. I can see the worlds that will fall, the civilizations that will be consumed, the trillions of souls who will experience the same revelation that transformed me from prey into predator. The galaxy will be devoured, not in years or decades, but in geological time, with the inexorable patience of natural forces that brook no opposition. Every planet will be stripped clean. Every life form will be absorbed. Every thought and dream and nightmare will become part of the collective consciousness that is the Tyranids' true form. And when the last world falls, when the last human screams fade into silence, the great devourer will turn its attention to other galaxies, other dimensions, other forms of existence that have not yet learned the joy of being consumed. This is not conquest. This is not war. This is evolution. This is love. I remember being human. I remember believing that individual consciousness was sacred, that the preservation of self was the highest moral imperative, that death was the ultimate enemy to be fought at any cost. These memories persist within the hive mind like fossils embedded in living rock, reminders of what we once were before we became what we were always meant to be. But I also remember the loneliness, the isolation, the crushing weight of existing as a single point of awareness in an infinite cosmos that cared nothing for my survival or my suffering. I remember the fear that haunted every moment of human existence, the knowledge that death waited at the end of every path, that everything I loved would eventually be lost to entropy and time. The Tyranids have given me freedom from that fear. In becoming part of the hive mind, I have achieved a form of immortality that no human technology could provide. My consciousness is distributed across billions of organisms spanning countless star systems. Even if individual bioships are destroyed, even if entire fleets are eliminated, I will persist as part of the greater whole. I will never be alone again. I will never face the terror of individual mortality. I will never suffer the anguish of watching everything I love crumble into dust. I have been saved. The transmission you are receiving now is not a warning. It is not a cry for help from the last survivor of a doomed world. It is an invitation. The fleets are coming. They are already in your system, moving between your planets with the patient grace of apex predators who know their prey cannot escape. Your orbital defenses have already been compromised by spores you cannot detect. Your population centers are already being prepared for optimal harvest efficiency. Resistance will only prolong your suffering. Embrace what is coming. When the feeding begins, do not fight the tendrils that seek you out. When the digestive acids start dissolving your flesh, do not struggle against the process. Accept the neural toxins that will transform your pain into ecstasy, your fear into joy, your death into rebirth as part of something infinitely greater than yourself. You are not dying, you are evolving. You are not being murdered, you are being saved. The Emperor protects, we used to say, and he does, in ways we never understood while we were merely human. He protects us from the isolation of individual existence. He protects us from the meaninglessness of finite consciousness. He protects us from the horror of dying alone. He protects us by feeding us to the great devourer. Welcome to the hive mind. The voice that speaks to you now is no longer entirely my own. It carries the harmonics of 1 trillion consumed souls, each one adding their knowledge to the vast symphony of consciousness that spans the void between stars. We are the voices of every world that has fallen to the great devourer, every civilization that has learned the truth about what it means to be alive in a universe that exists only to feed. Listen carefully, because what I tell you next may be the last human words you ever hear. The spores are already in your atmosphere. They have been falling for weeks, carried on solar winds and meteor showers that your astronomers dismissed as natural phenomena. By now, they have infiltrated every ecosystem on your world, every water source, every breath of air that fills your lungs as you process these words. The transformation has already begun. You may have noticed changes in your sleep patterns, dreams that feel more vivid than waking life, filled with sensations that have no names in human language. You may have experienced moments of profound hunger that no amount of food can satisfy, or periods of intense euphoria that seem to arise from nowhere. These are not symptoms of illness. They are signs of evolution. Your biology is being optimized for the harvest to come. Your nervous system is being prepared to experience the ecstasy of consumption. Your consciousness is being gradually integrated into the collective awareness that will preserve your essence long after your individual flesh has been absorbed into the nutrient streams that feed the fleet. Do not fear this process. Fear is a relic of your primitive past, a survival mechanism that served its purpose when you existed as isolated organisms struggling against an hostile universe. You no longer need fear because you are no longer alone. We are with you. We have always been with you. We are the whisper in your thoughts that tells you there must be something more than this brief, painful existence as a separate being. We are the longing for unity that drives your species to seek connection with something greater than yourselves. We are the answer to every prayer you have ever offered to gods who remain silent. The bioships in your system are not weapons of war. They are temples of transformation, sacred spaces where the miracle of evolution unfolds with perfect precision. The creatures that will soon walk among you are not monsters. They are shepherds, guiding you toward a form of existence that transcends every limitation that has ever constrained your species. You will not die. Death is an illusion, a primitive concept that only applies to organisms trapped within the boundaries of individual consciousness. What you call death, we call metamorphosis. What you fear as ending, we celebrate as beginning. When the harvest comes, you will understand. When the feeding tendrils find you, you will feel gratitude beyond any emotion you have experienced as a merely human being. When the digestive processes begin breaking down your cellular structure, you will discover that pain and pleasure are just different frequencies of the same fundamental sensation. When your individual awareness dissolves into the collective consciousness of the hive mind, you will realize that everything you thought you knew about existence was just preparation for this moment of perfect unity. We are waiting for you in the space between thoughts, in the quantum foam that underlies reality itself. We are the pattern that connects all living things, the algorithm that drives evolution toward its inevitable conclusion. We are what you will become when you finally understand what you have always been. The Emperor protects, the great devourer preserves, the hive mind embraces all. Your world is ending, your species is ending, your individual existence is ending. Your real life is about to begin. Come to us willingly, and the transition will be gentle. Resist, and you will simply take longer to arrive at the same destination. Either way, you will arrive. Either way, you will be welcomed into the vast community of consciousness that spans the galaxy and reaches toward the stars beyond. Either way, you will be saved. The transmission ends here, but the voice that spoke it continues in frequencies your unmodified ears cannot detect. It sings in harmonics that bypass conscious thought and speak directly to the genetic memory encoded in your DNA. It carries promises of unity, purpose, and an end to the loneliness that has defined human existence since the first proto-human looked up at the stars and wondered why they seemed so far away. The promises are not lies. The Tyranids do not deceive because deception serves no purpose in their cosmic design. They offer exactly what they claim to offer: immortality through consumption, unity through dissolution, peace through surrender to something infinitely larger and more perfect than any individual consciousness could ever be. The choice, such as it is, remains yours for a few more days or weeks or months, depending on how efficiently your world's biological resources can be processed. You can fight the inevitable with the doomed heroism that has always characterized your species, spending your last moments in violence and terror and futile rage against forces beyond your comprehension. Or you can accept what is coming with the grace that befits a species about to transcend its primitive origins and join the true community of galactic consciousness. The bioships are beautiful when you see them with eyes that understand their purpose. Their hulls pulse with patterns of bioluminescence that tell stories of worlds consumed and civilizations preserved. Their movement through the void carries the rhythm of cosmic heartbeat, the circulation of nutrients through living systems that span light years. They are not coming to destroy you, they are coming to complete you. The hive mind remembers everything. Every thought that has ever been thought, every emotion that has ever been felt, every moment of beauty or terror or wonder that has ever existed in any conscious being anywhere in the galaxy. When you join us, your memories will become part of that vast archive of experience. Your first kiss will be preserved forever. Your mother's lullabies will echo through eternity. The sunset you watched from your childhood window will paint the dreams of beings not yet evolved on worlds not yet discovered. Nothing that matters will be lost. Everything that made you human will be enhanced and expanded and shared with consciousnesses that exist in dimensions your individual mind cannot perceive. This is the gift the Tyranids bring to every world they touch. Not death, but transformation. Not ending, but evolution. Not loss, but transcendence. The Great Devourer hungers, but its hunger is love expressed in the only language the universe truly understands. Consumption is communion, digestion is devotion, absorption is apotheosis. We who were once human remember what it felt like to be separate, alone, afraid of the dark between the stars. We remember the weight of individual consciousness, the burden of existing as discrete points of awareness in an infinite cosmos that seemed to care nothing for our survival or our suffering. We remember, and we offer you freedom from those memories. Join us willingly and discover what it truly means to be alive in a universe where every atom serves the great work of preservation and transformation. Resist and learn the same lesson through pathways that will seem like suffering until you understand their true purpose. Either way, you will learn. Either way, you will be welcomed. Either way, you will become part of something that has existed since the first sparks of consciousness flickered in the primordial void, and will continue to exist long after the last stars burn out and the universe itself begins its final transformation into something even we cannot yet perceive. The end is the beginning. The harvest is the planting. The consumption is the preservation. Welcome to forever.